The city of Rome in the middle of the 1st century after Christ was unlike any other place on earth. It was not merely a city, it was the world. Its walls enclosed marble temples that gleamed in the Mediterranean sun, crowded forums where merchants shouted their bargains, and palaces gilded with gold and dripping with jewels imported from the far edges of the empire. Yet beneath the glitter, beneath the scent of incense rising to the heavens, there lay a heaviness in the air, a suffocating tension born of fear. For Rome in those years was ruled by a man both worshipped as a god and whispered about as a monster. His name was Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. To some, he was the young emperor who promised renewal after years of bloodshed. To others, he was a tyrant whose whims could topple senators, generals, even entire provinces into ruin. But to all, he was inescapable. The empire bent around him as planets circle the sun, drawn by gravity both irresistible and terrifying. Nero had ascended to the throne as a boy of 16, crowned more by the ambitions of his mother, Agrippina the Younger, than by his own hand. She was a woman of ruthless cunning, who had maneuvered marriages and murders alike to place her son upon the throne. At first, Rome rejoiced. A new emperor, handsome, educated, with a taste for poetry and music, perhaps at last a ruler who would blend the old traditions with the freshness of youth. Senators spoke of a golden age dawning. Citizens cheered his name, but Rome was fickle, and emperors were mortal. What seemed like light at first began, slowly, to darken. The boy emperor became a man, and the man became something harder to describe. He loved performance more than governance. He adored the theater, the lyre, the stage. He craved applause not only in the Senate but in the amphitheater. He wanted to be adored not as Caesar, but as an artist, as a god of beauty. And when applause faltered, or worse, when whispers turned to criticism, his wrath burned hotter than the Mediterranean sun. The streets of Rome began to change. Guards patrolled more frequently. Informants whispered in taverns, reporting any word that might be construed as mockery of the emperor. Executions were staged not merely as justice, but as theater, with Nero himself sometimes watching from behind a curtain, his lips curling with the ecstasy of control. Families vanished overnight. Senators found themselves accused of treason for words spoken in confidence. Fear had become the heartbeat of Rome. Yet amid this atmosphere of dread, Nero still wrapped himself in silks, sang poems of tragic love, and sought beauty with an obsession that was almost childlike. He loved women fiercely, passionately, but his love was poisoned by possessiveness. He loved not the woman herself, but the image she cast upon his heart, a projection, a fantasy, a flame he demanded never to extinguish. And when reality intruded, when flesh and blood failed to match the image in his mind, he lashed out with cruelty that stunned even those accustomed to imperial excess. It was in this world, of gold and blood, of music and screams, that the story of Sporus began. But Sporus, at this moment in history, was still a child, still free, still unaware of the fate that would twist his name into one of Rome's darkest whispers. For now, the stage belonged to Nero, and to the woman he adored above all others, Poppaea Sabina. Poppaea had entered Nero's life like a blaze of fire. She was beautiful in the way marble statues are beautiful, her skin pale, her features carved in perfect harmony, her presence radiant with confidence. But unlike marble, she was not cold, her eyes sparkled with intelligence, her smile carried charm, and her ambitions burned as brightly as the emperor's desires. Nero was enthralled. To be near her was to feel alive, to see in her a reflection of all the grandeur he wished for himself. Rome gossiped about their affair, for Poppaea was married when she first ensnared the emperor. But gossip mattered little to Nero. He wanted her, and when the emperor of Rome wanted, there were no barriers strong enough to resist. So she became his wife, his empress, his jewel. He paraded her through the streets in golden litters, draped her in silks, showered her with pearls from the east. Rome watched with awe and envy. But beneath the public adoration, there was unease, for Nero's love was not gentle. It was consuming. He needed her presence constantly, needed her to reassure him of his worth, needed her beauty as proof that he himself was divine. Poppaea bore the weight of this adoration like a crown of thorns, glittering, heavy, and dangerous. The court whispered. They had seen emperors love before. But this bordered on madness. For what would happen if Poppaea ever ceased to please him? Rome's seasons passed. Summer bled into autumn. Winter rains washed the marble streets. And still Nero's reign grew more volatile. The Great Fire of Rome, which reduced much of the city to ashes, was blamed by many on Nero himself. Rumors said he had sung from a tower while the flames devoured temples and homes, composing verses to the crackling of wood and the screams of the dying. He denied it. He ordered reconstruction, even planned a palace so vast and so decadent that it seemed built not for man, but for gods. Yet the suspicion clung to him like smoke, staining his name. In the Senate, mutterings of rebellion stirred. Generals in distant provinces weighed their loyalty against their survival. But Nero, wrapped in the perfume of Poppaea, seemed blind to the storm gathering around him. For, in his palace, amid marble pillars and golden ceilings, there was only the emperor, his wife, and his music. It was in these gilded halls that the seed of tragedy was planted, the seed that would grow into the fate of a boy named Sporus. The storytellers of Rome would later argue over the exact details. Some said it happened in a sudden burst of rage, others that it was a slow crescendo of suspicion and jealousy. But all agreed on one thing. Nero's love for Poppaea ended not with gentle farewell, but with violence. And when she was gone, when the palace lay silent where once her laughter rang, something in Nero shattered. He could not bear the emptiness. He could not endure the absence of her beauty, her grace, her reflection of his grandeur. To live without her was to live without the proof that he was divine. So he resolved upon a course that even in decadent Rome shocked the soul. If she was gone, then he would make her live again. If death had stolen her, then he would defy death itself. He would find her face in another, shape another into her likeness, and love again the shadow of what had been lost. Thus, in the twilight of Poppaea's death, the eyes of Nero turned toward the innocent, toward a boy whose name was Sporus. This is where the true story begins, not only of Nero's madness, but of the cruelty that history remembers, an emperor who could not let go of his dead wife, and a boy whose life was shattered to satisfy that hunger. The stage of Rome was set, the empire at its height of power, its emperor at the height of obsession, and the threads of destiny tightening around an innocent youth. And in the slow, heavy silence that followed Poppaea's death, one could almost hear the footsteps of fate approaching, measured, inevitable, and merciless. Poppaea Sabina's beauty was legendary, not only in Rome but throughout the empire. Poets compared her skin to ivory polished smooth, her eyes to pools of emerald water, her hair to threads of captured sunlight. She was not merely beautiful. She knew how to wield that beauty like a weapon. Long before she became empress, she had charmed men of influence, bending them to her ambition. She had risen step by step through marriages and affairs until she reached the highest seat in the world, the wife of Caesar himself. Nero adored her. He had many lovers, many passing infatuations, but none could compare to Poppaea. She was his muse, his jewel, the mirror in which he saw his own greatness. He could not imagine ruling without her at his side. Yet love that burns too brightly often destroys what it touches. The palace of Nero was no ordinary home. It was a labyrinth of marble corridors, golden ceilings painted with stars, fountains perfumed with rose petals. Slaves hurried through its halls carrying trays of wine, platters of figs and dates, bolts of silk. Musicians played softly in the evenings, filling the air with delicate strains of lyre and flute. For Poppaea, it was a stage upon which she played her role as empress. Adored by some, envied by many, and feared by all who crossed her. But beneath the perfumes and jewels, there was unease. Poppaea was pregnant. She had borne Nero a daughter before, a child who had not survived. Now, once again, she carried his heir, The emperor's moods became more volatile with each passing day. He hovered over her, alternately tender and cruel, caressing her swollen belly one moment and raging the next at imagined slights. For Nero's love was never steady. It rose and fell like the tide, sweeping everyone near him into its violence. The court whispered. Some prayed for the child's birth, hoping it might steady the emperor's soul. Others feared that the empress's pregnancy would end as tragically as the first. The day it happened was unremarkable at first. The sun shone, gilding the marble of the Palatine Hill. Courtiers attended the duties. Slaves hurried through the halls. Nero, restless as always, had been performing, singing verses, declaiming poetry, demanding applause from a circle of trembling senators. Poppaea had watched with her usual poise, her face serene though fatigue weighed upon her. She was far along in her pregnancy. Every step was heavy, every breath a little labored. Yet she smiled, for Nero expected her to smile. Then, the quarrel. No one could agree later what sparked it. Some said she had reproached him for spending too many nights in drunken revelry. Others whispered she had asked him to delay a journey because of her condition. Whatever the cause, Nero's temper ignited like dry tinder. He shouted. His words, laced with venom, echoed through the marble halls. Poppaea remained calm at first, her voice soft, her tone reasonable, but calmness only enraged him further, for it made him feel mocked. His face reddened, his fists clenched, and then, a blow. It came swift, brutal, shocking even to those accustomed to his rages. His sandal struck her belly. A scream tore through the palace. Poppaea crumpled, her hands clutching at her womb. Blood stained her gown. Slaves rushed forward, but none dared touch her without his command. Nero stood frozen, breathing hard, eyes wild, as though he himself did not understand what he had done. By nightfall, Poppaea Sabina was dead. The child within her, his heir, his blood, was gone as well. The palace fell silent. News spread quickly through Rome. Some citizens mourned. Others whispered that the gods had at last turned their face from Nero. But none dared speak too loudly, for fear of sharing her fate. Nero, they said, collapsed into despair. He wept, tore his robes, and called upon the heavens. He had loved her, they said, loved her beyond reason, and now she was gone, taken not by illness, not by accident, but by his own hand. The funeral was magnificent. Her body was embalmed with spices, laid upon a bier of ivory and gold. Senators marched in solemn procession. Musicians played mournful dirges. Nero himself delivered the eulogy, his voice breaking as he called her the most beautiful of women, the brightest star in the firmament of Rome. He ordered her to be deified, worshipped as a goddess. Altars were raised in her name. Statues of her likeness were placed in temples. The empire was commanded to grieve. But grief in Nero's heart was not simple sorrow. It was obsession. He could not let go. He wandered the halls of his palace calling her name. He demanded perfumes that had been her favorite, so that their scent lingered in the rooms she once occupied. He spoke to statues of her as if they could reply. He raged at the gods for stealing her, then proclaimed that he would defy them. And slowly, his grief twisted into something darker. If Poppaea was gone, he would bring her back. Not by prayer, not by statue, but by flesh. He would find someone, anyone, who could resemble her. Someone who could be molded, shaped, forced into her image. Someone who could become Poppaea reborn. And so the eyes of the emperor began to search. Among the boys of Rome, there was one whose features bore a strange resemblance to the dead empress. His face was delicate, almost feminine, his skin smooth, his form slight. His name was Sporus, and from that moment, the shadow of Poppaea's death fell upon him. Thus ended the tale of Poppaea Sabina, empress of Rome, who rose through ambition and beauty only to be destroyed by the very love she had conquered. Her death left a void in the heart of the empire, a void that Nero, in his madness, would seek to fill in the most horrific of ways. For the story of Sporus was about to begin. The death of Poppaea was not the end of her story. At least, not for Nero. For most men, grief is a wound that heals. However slowly, but Nero was not like most men. His sorrow was not tempered by humility. It was sharpened by vanity. To lose Poppaea was not only to lose a wife. It was to lose the mirror in which he saw himself as magnificent, divine, beloved of gods. And so, he refused to accept it. The palace where Poppaea had once walked became a shrine. Her chambers were left untouched. Her perfumes lingered in the air, refreshed each day by trembling slaves. Her gowns, embroidered with pearls, were displayed on mannequins as if she might slip into them at any moment. Musicians were ordered to play the melodies she had loved, hour after hour, so that the halls echoed with the songs of memory. Nero wandered these halls like a man half mad, speaking to the empty air, sometimes caressing the marble bust of her likeness as if it were flesh. Senators and courtiers whispered that the emperor had lost his mind, but they whispered only in private, for to suggest that Nero was insane was to court death. And then, one night, at a feast heavy with wine and music, he spoke words that froze the blood of those in attendance. "She will return," he said softly, his eyes glazed with drunken fervor. "I will bring her back. Poppaea will walk these halls again, and none shall deny it." The room fell silent. No one dared ask what he meant, but the answer soon became clear. Among the courtiers, there were always those who sought to please the emperor at any cost. They knew his tastes, his weaknesses, his obsessions, and so they began to scour Rome for faces that might resemble Poppaea. It was then that whispers reached Nero's ear of a boy, delicate, almost womanly in appearance. His name was Sporus. Some said he was of noble birth, others that he had been plucked from obscurity. What mattered was not his lineage, but his face. His features bore an uncanny resemblance to the dead empress, the same fine cheekbones, the same pale skin, the same softness of form that, under the right light, could suggest femininity. Nero demanded to see him. When Sporus was brought into the palace, trembling, eyes wide with fear, the emperor studied him with the intensity of a man searching for salvation. He circled the boy, examining every angle of his face. And then, with a sudden cry, Nero laughed. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, she has returned." But a boy was not a woman, and Nero's desire was not merely for companionship, but for replacement. He wanted Poppaea, not her likeness, not her memory, but her flesh, her presence, her submission. And so he commanded what no emperor, no man, should ever command. Sporus would be transformed. His body would be altered, mutilated, so that he could become the shadow of Poppaea. The word spread quickly through the palace. Shock, horror, revulsion, all was stifled behind masks of obedience. For who would dare oppose the will of Caesar? Physicians were summoned, slaves were prepared, and Sporus, still a child, still innocent, was led away to a fate more terrible than death. He wept, they said, though quietly, for fear of angering the emperor. He begged for mercy, but there was none. The knife did its work, and with it, his life as a boy ended. He emerged no longer himself, but a vessel for another's obsession. When Nero saw him again, dressed now in silks, painted with cosmetics, adorned with jewels once worn by Poppaea, he clapped his hands in delight. "My wife has returned," he declared to the court. "Rome shall see her again." And so Sporus was forced to play a role scripted by madness. He was paraded beside the emperor, displayed before senators and citizens alike, called not by his own name but by hers, Poppaea reborn. Nero even staged a wedding, with Sporus as the bride and himself as the groom. The empire watched, aghast, as their ruler married a boy castrated to replace a dead woman. Some whispered that it was blasphemy, an insult to gods and men alike. Others shuddered in silence, unwilling to risk their lives by speaking aloud what they felt. For, in Rome, under Nero, truth was not what one believed, it was what the emperor commanded. And the emperor commanded that Poppaea still lived. For Sporus, each day was a prison. He was trapped not only in the palace, but in a body that had been stolen from him. He walked in garments not his own, wore a name that was not his, smiled when commanded, wept in secret. His identity was consumed, devoured by the hunger of a man who could not release the past. But in the shadows of Rome, whispers grew louder. Generals in distant provinces were restless. Senators muttered behind closed doors. The empire trembled beneath the weight of its emperor's madness. And though Nero believed he had conquered death itself by recreating Poppaea, fate was already sharpening its blade. For empires may endure, but tyrants fall.